28th, which is when the election will conclude. Now, for presidential hopefuls, of course, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, the race is not just about winning hearts and minds, it's also about mapping out a path through the states. Candidates must strategically combine states that they can count on with battlegrounds that hold the key to their electoral success this time. Now, with this race becoming such a neck-to-neck battle, it is only the swing states that will decide who becomes the next president. So the journey to the White House, of course, is a complex puzzle where every vote counts and stakes could not be higher this time.
Now, like Ishita mentioned, if neither of the candidates is able to secure the 270 magic figure, then what really happens? It is a neck-and-neck fight. It is going to be a historical situation if such a case arises. Rohit Sharma will explain to you what happens in such a scenario.
The American election is so close that we do not know what will happen, who's going to win this election. But what is absolutely known is the fact that one of the candidates will be taking oath right here on the Capitol Hill, which is behind me. And as you can see, it's all lit up and it's all its glory. But there is also a chance, a very outside chance, that this election could be tied. And when I say it could be tied, it could mean that both candidates don't get to 270 electoral college votes. Both can end up getting 269 and 269, which would mean that there has to be a tiebreaker vote. And who's going to cast this tiebreaker vote? Well, the American Constitution has an amendment in place for scenarios like this, for an outlier election like this, where if both candidates end up with 269 electoral college votes, it's the House of Representatives and the Senate that decide who becomes its next president. And in the amendment, it is clearly written that the House of Representatives, which is the lower house, they will elect or select the next president of the United States, while the Senate will have say over who becomes its next vice president. Now, this is why the down ballot rates in America are also very important in this election cycle. From the polling, it seems like Democrats have an advantage in the House of Representative races, so they might be able to come and win a majority in the House of Representatives, meaning they could very well end up electing a Democrat as the next president of the United States. However, in the Senate, it looks like the Republicans will have a majority. And obviously, for obvious reasons, they will choose a Republican as the next vice president of the United States. And it's never happened in the history of America where there has been a tie and then it had to be broken. But if there was a possibility in modern politics of that happening, that could very well happen in this very election.
That's all in this edition of Elections Unlocked US Special. But before I go, I'll leave you with this story of a social media sensation that has captured America's attention. Peanut, the squirrel, was rescued by New Yorker Mark Longo, was later euthanized by the New York authorities after having tested positive for rabies. He has created a sensation and outrage in the city and has become a talking point this election. Take a look at this report.
A social media sensation, Peanut the squirrel, has shaken up American politics days before crucial elections. Peanut was rescued by New Yorker Mark Longo and lived with him for 7 years. On Saturday, Longo was raided and Peanut taken away by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and the Health Department. Peanut was later euthanized to test for rabies.
It not only tears my family apart, but Peanut was the cornerstone of our nonprofit animal rescue. And 10 to 12 DEC officers raided my house as if I was a drug dealer. I was sat outside my house for 5 hours. I had to get a police escort to my bathroom. I wasn't even allowed to feed my rescue horses breakfast or lunch. I was sat there like a criminal.
A raccoon, also in Longo's care, was also taken away and euthanized to test for rabies. The viral squirrel's euthanasia triggered massive outrage online. With number of Trump supporters criticizing the Democrat government, the controversy was amplified by Donald Trump's top backer, Tesla CEO Elon Musk. American state law requires people to get a license if they wish to own a wild animal. Longo says he was working to get Peanut the required certification. Peanut amassed hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram and TikTok. But at the peak of American elections, its death would be its most viral moment. Bureau Report, India Today.
At this moment, attention squarely focused on who's likely to win the presidential elections in the United States. If you think Maharashtra and Jharkhand are tight elections, don't know, can't say, too close to call, well, the United States is a whole different ballgame. And to talk about this, we're joined on this broadcast by Ishan Tharoor. He's a well-known columnist at the Washington Post. I have Pramit Pal Chowdhury, head of the India practice at Eurasia Group. And we have Arun Kumar Singh, who's been India's ambassador to the United States and is a non-resident senior fellow at Carnegie, India. I want to go across to Ishan first. Ishan, very rarely have pollsters and pundits been quite as confused. Are they just hedging their bets and therefore not giving clear answers? Are all these battleground states actually likely to go down to the wire in the way that these polls are suggesting?
Look, the polls have been suggesting for a very, very long time that it's a dead heat, and it is a dead heat. So, I mean, there's, on a certain level, they're right. Of course, there are lots of different models, lots of different polls, and lots of different polls that say certain things, point to different trends happening that could tilt one way or the other. We're talking about an election where the difference will be such a narrow margin of votes that it's, of course, quite difficult to really know come Tuesday night, and probably not just Tuesday night, come Wednesday morning, perhaps even Thursday morning, what some of the results may be. And so we're in a situation now where, yes, because of the particular anachronism of the American system, it comes down to a handful of certain states that are really up in the air. And both campaigns think they're making a strong last push and hoping to consolidate some gains.
A lot of what you do, Pramit Pal, at the Eurasia Group is risk advisory. What is the Eurasia Group advising its clients in terms of who do you think is more likely to win at this moment? 46, 48, 49, 50. It's looking really, really tight. Is that how tight it's going to be? Or do you think everyone's just hedging because they can't be quite sure?
Well, I think that they can't be quite sure. I think the comeback companies, from what I remember of our American team, continues to believe Trump has an edge. But it's really down to, I think, one of the calculations, as little as 80,000 voters will make the decision. That's not a surprise. Biden defeated Trump with only about, I think, 45,000 votes made the decision for him, gave him the Electoral College. This time it'll go down to almost the same number. Once you're down to such tiny numbers, the polling is almost incapable of actually predicting anything. And on top of that, polling in America now is as bad as polling in India. It has repeatedly gotten elections, got the last two presidential elections wrong. It's been incredibly poor in measuring, should we say, the degree of, in the last two elections, of Trump support. It grossly underestimated it. And then in the midterms, it swung in the other direction and overestimated Republican support. So if you look at a graph, there's a recent graph that came out by a group of pollsters who looked at it and said the degree of error now in U.S. polling is at a record high. America just can't work out what its own voters want to do.
It's not just America. Haryana shows us that that's the case in India as well, but that's a whole different conversation for another day. Ambassador Singh, you've seen American politics at close quarters during your time there. Looked at from the outside, this Trump campaign looks more organized than the 2016 campaign for sure, arguably more organized than 2020 as well. Your sense of who carries the momentum in the final stages?
So I had watched closely the elections in 2008, 12, 16, 20, and of course now the current one. And you're right that this time perhaps the Trump campaign is more organized, although Trump continues to be unpredictable, unpredictable in many ways. But I still think it's difficult to say who carries the momentum. Now, if you recall 2016, it was only after midnight that the Clinton campaign finally conceded that she might be losing and then came back to concede only the next day. And in the 2020 campaign, Biden came on stage late at night and said, although the trends seem to be against us, we are likely to win. So just hang on there. So I think, as you said, there was a sense that immediately after Kamala Harris' nomination came through, she had the edge. After a while, Trump was catching on. But of late, she's again got the momentum. So I think on balance, one should just say it's difficult to predict. And I think from India's point of view, it doesn't matter who wins.
Ishan, let's build on that. Does it matter to India who wins? To some extent, in some ways, it does, because Trump comes in. If he increases tariffs, that impacts India. He's also more mercurial and transactional. On the other hand, Kamala Harris as president could potentially want to create more troubles for Prime Minister Modi and the Indian government in a lot of things that someone like Donald Trump won't care very much about.
I think the ambassador is right. There's been all signs from the Biden administration that India is a priority for the United States. They see India as a strategic partner in the future, and they wouldn't want to rock the boat. The wild card, as you said, is Trump's economic plans, his vision for really disrupting global trade and slapping tariffs on virtually everything. And then, of course, Trump's approach to foreign policy in general is so based on his kind of sense of bilateral deal-making, his transactionalism, that there could be moments where India could be surprised by certain deals that Trump makes, Trump wants to make with India or wants to make with other countries as well. So I think in terms of continuity and reliability, there's a safer bet with the Harris administration. I think, before we even talk about the foreign policy implications, the other thing to really know about and recognize is that if Trump loses, he is not going to accept it. He has made it very abundantly clear that defeat is not something he's going to accept. He doesn't still accept his defeat in 2020, and the entire ecosystem around him has already started to lay the ground with conspiracy theories about the scams and steal happening right now. So we're heading for a pretty volatile moment in the event that Kamala Harris does win.
Pramit Pal, does it matter from India's perspective who wins? I get the sense by talking to many in government that they believe that Donald Trump might be easier to deal with. They also have a good rapport, the Prime Minister and Donald Trump. Will that make a difference, or do you think that Kamala Harris too is just likely to carry on in the same spirit as Joe Biden?
Well, I think the core relationship will remain exactly the same. The core of China, technology, though the Indo-Pacific, all of that will remain, has been constant with both the Biden administration and with the Trump administration in the past. If you look at the foreign policy teams on either side, we saw our foreign minister met Philip Gordon, who's likely to be the national security advisor of Kamala Harris recently, and didn't seem to have any problems at that meeting, or was reassured that there would be continuity. And I gather some members of the Biden team, including, let's say, CIA Director Bill Burns, would probably continue in a Harris administration. So the continuity is strong. But there will be, yes, areas on the margins in which they will differ. Kamala Harris is a legal person. She tends to be much more focused she seems to be more legalistic, if you wish, in her thinking. So issues like civil rights, the Panun case that's there between India and US will probably become a bit more difficult under her. On the other hand, with Trump, one area which Prime Minister Modi takes very seriously, finance, green finance and climate generally, would almost disappear off the government-to-government agenda because his administration, or he doesn't take that seriously. So, but those are fringe issues. The broad strategic relationship will remain, I think, completely solid, and I don't think that will change at all.
Ambassador Arun Singh, is it correct that the MEA would find it easier to work with a Trump administration? Does Kamala Harris as president and her administration pose a greater headache for India on issues like Khalistani terrorists being supported by countries like the US and Canada? Is there likely to be more prickliness with a Kamala Harris than with a Donald Trump?
So I can't speak for the MEA or the government. I've been away from the government for more than 8 years. But based on my understanding of the situation and my understanding of how both Republican and Democratic administrations have handled India over the last couple of decades, including the Obama-Biden administration, the Biden-Harris administration, and the Trump administration, I think we should be broadly okay. There is, in some quarters, sometimes a perception that Trump is easier to handle. But if you go back and recall the Trump presidency, he was very, very unpredictable. He criticized India several times for what he said were high tariffs in India. He ridiculed the Indian leaders. He imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from India, ostensibly on national security grounds, which you can't explain if India is a strategic partner. He removed generalized scheme of preferences, under which many Indian products had duty-free access in the US market. And then you recall that in 2019, he invited Imran Khan to the White House when he wanted Pakistan to pressurize Taliban into getting into an agreement with the US. And in that White House meeting, he said that he was ready to mediate on Kashmir, and that the Indian Prime Minister had asked him to mediate on Kashmir, which was simply not true. And the Indian Foreign Minister had to, a couple of days later, say in Parliament that there's no truth to what the President had said. And also in the Trump administration, both governments had tried to do a limited trade agreement. And they discussed that for 2 years, and they couldn't even succeed in getting that. So, the Trump administration will have broadly a positive approach, as we saw with the Indo-Pacific strategy, the starting of the Quad meetings. Similarly, in the Biden-Harris administration, we saw the Quad being elevated to summit-level meetings, and this whole new initiative on critical and emerging technologies, which has really deepened the technology partnership between India and the US. The authorization for General Electric to transfer 80% of technology for the F414 engines, or the authorization for the armed drones to be supplied to India. So these are the things that happened during the Biden-Harris presidency. So I think in the broad strategic convergence that is there, we should be okay with either winning the election. There will be different sets of challenges with the two, and we have to find a way to handle and manage those differences.
Ishan, how is Trump of circa 2024 looking different from what we saw between 2016 and 2020?
Well, the first thing is that he's older, exhibiting more signs of that age, and there are mounting concerns about his actual acuity and fitness in certain moments. He's had some quite worrying public displays. He is an angrier Trump. He is operating on a lot of grievance. Much of it is personal because of the mounting legal cases that he's faced and that he will be able to evade if he wins the presidency. But then there's also, he is channeling a right-wing nationalist movement that operates on grievance and anger, that is inflamed about various issues, most especially immigration, which may also have interesting wrinkles for the Indian-US relationship. And he's somebody who has really, his pitch to his base has been, this is going to be an all-gloves-off presidency. I'm not going to take any prisoners here. I will be your vengeance. And he's promised all sorts of astonishing executive acts. Some of them he may not be able to actually accomplish. But he's really going to take the US into an interesting chapter of its democracy if he wins.
Why has the Kamala Harris campaign, Ishan, according to you, failed to take off? When she came in soon after President Biden announced that he was stepping aside, the gap in the polls was much more. From there on, her campaign seems to have faltered to some extent and not really taken off, leading to someone like Barack Obama having to tell black American men not to vote for Donald Trump and instead stick with Team Harris.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's failed to take off. I think, yes, she came in quite late. The circumstances in which she entered were quite extraordinary, but we're seeing a campaign that is trying to build this sort of supposed big tent coalition. She's trying to appeal to centrists, appeal to moderate Republicans who can't really stomach Trump, as opposed to really turning the way Trump does towards the Democratic base, which in many cases are people of color, young people, poorer people perhaps in the cities. She's not making that pitch. She's making the pitch of the centrist establishment, which was the exact same pitch that Hillary Clinton made in 2016. But I think the Kamala campaign is also very mindful of what went wrong in 2016, and they believe that they've cobbled together the kind of votes and the kind of message that will make the difference in these pivotal swing states. And they're doing quite well, perhaps even better than Biden did in 2020 with white college-educated voters. And this is the curious thing. And you're seeing, of course, the Democrats will always win a majority of women, a majority of people of color. But yes, you are seeing on the margins, men especially, and men of color especially, indicating that they are more likely now than before to consider Trump and the Republicans.
Well, before we get to Maharashtra and Jharkhand, there is the results in the United States to deal with. We keep going back to Ishan Tharoor, Pramit Pal and Arun Kumar Singh. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights on the build-up to the final climax in the US presidential elections. Thank you.
Thank you.
While most opinion polls in the United States show a dead heat between Trump and Harris, the state of Iowa, a deeply red state, has sprung a last-minute surprise. Kamala Harris has taken a surprising lead in a voter survey over Trump in the state that last voted for a Democrat candidate in 2012.
Chest thumping, beating trumpets. Both candidates for the US presidential election tried to ensure that their voters remain confident before the 5th November vote.
But all I can say is on Tuesday, just go out and vote, and we're going to close this thing out, and it's going to be party time. It's going to be party time. And this is really all you need to know. Kamala broke it, and I'll fix it, and we'll do it very quickly.
So, Michigan, 2 days to go. You ready? You ready? In one of the most consequential elections of our lifetime, and we have momentum. It is on our side. Can you feel it? And we have the momentum because our campaign is tapping into the ambitions, the aspirations, and the dreams of the American people. Because we are optimistic and excited about what we can do together.
One thing is for sure, that this was a very colorful election campaign and both candidates have been neck and neck throughout. Posters are busy predicting the front-runner. Atlas Inter's latest poll shows former President Donald Trump leading the predictions, especially in all 7 swing states. About 49% of the respondents said they would vote for Donald Trump in the upcoming presidential election, as the Republicans hold a 1.8% vote lead over his counterpart, Democrat Kamala Harris. The survey conducted on the first 2 days of November included nearly 2,500 likely voters in the US, the majority of which were female. A Reuters Ipsos poll published last week on 29 October showed Kamala Harris lead over Donald Trump, with the Democrat ahead by few percentage points over the Republican, 49% to 46%. The American website 538 of ABC focuses on opinion poll analysis. In their latest release, Harris had a small lead over Trump in the national polling averages, 48% to 47%.
Making Donald Trump one of the biggest losers.
The current Vice President Kamala Harris has led Trump in every Reuters, Ipsos and ABC 538 poll of registered voters since she entered the race in July and built a lead of nearly 4 percentage points towards the end of August. The polls were relatively stable in September and early October, but they have tightened in the last couple of weeks, with her lead steadily shrinking since late September. While national polls are a useful guide as to how popular a candidate is across the whole country, they are not the best way to predict the US presidential election result. Bureau Report, India Today.
Kamala, you're fired. Get out of here.
I want to go across to our correspondents joining us from the United States. Geeta Mohan, our foreign affairs editor, joins us from New York. We've got Rohit Sharma joining us from Washington, D.C. It's politically hot, but the weather seems a lot colder than it is in India at this moment. Geeta, you've seen many an Indian election and some American elections as well. How does this differ from everything we get to see back home?
Well, in terms of the scale, in terms of how the approaches, the media strategy, the election strategy, very, very different. What's on the agenda, what really matters, and how things make a difference over here as opposed to India. The election system itself is very different. So yes, it is rather confusing for people who are watching back home as to how is it that one person gets an entire state rather than getting the electoral numbers, as is the case in India. So interesting, Rahul, interesting play over here when it comes to elections. But there are 7 battleground states this time around. They normally differ from 6, 7 to 8. This time around there are 7. And Pennsylvania is going to be a very, very important one at that. Whether if Trump is going to get a hold of Pennsylvania or not is the big question. I'm in New York, and interestingly, New York has always been quite polarized since Trump stepped in. This time around as well, we have some Kamala Harris supporters here, but you have to come on the ground to see how many of them are actually coming out and supporting Donald Trump. You'd be surprised. There are people who are Hispanics, minorities, South Asians, Indian community I've been speaking with. All of them, Rahul, over here are coming out and saying that they prefer Trump to Kamala Harris. Might be different in different states, might be different in the battleground states, but in New York, it does seem like Republicans and Trump does have an upper hand, an edge over Kamala Harris.
Okay, Rohit, you've been covering this election very closely. Who do you think is ending this contest stronger? It seemed for a while that Kamala Harris was in the lead. Then it seemed Trump had edged past her in the battleground states. Now, a lot of the U.S. polls seem to suggest that Harris has picked up some momentum right towards the end of the campaign.
So, I mean, it is very interesting, Rahul. You know, we've seen a lot of U.S. elections over the years. Nothing, you know, the only thing that comes this close is the election of 2000, which is Bush versus Gore, and all came down to one state of Florida. And I think this time around, as Geeta was saying, it is the state of Pennsylvania. I spoke to somebody who's on the ground in Pennsylvania, somebody on Kamala Harris's campaign, and they texted me back saying it's anxious energy. They're getting flashbacks of 2016, where they thought they had it in the bag, but anything can happen. And I think most likely, Rahul, I think it's going to come down to voters who are going to be showing up to polling booths tomorrow. A lot of people have voted early. About 70 million people have used mail-in ballots and turned to election centers to vote. But can Kamala Harris and her campaign make sure that voters who haven't voted in these battleground states show up to polls tomorrow? I think that will decide who gets to win all these important battleground states. Also, the fact that, you know, everybody has been on the ground in Pennsylvania from both the campaigns. We're seeing Kamala Harris. She's going to be in Pennsylvania today. She's going to visit the 3 towns, Pittsburgh, Allentown, and the Bucks County, I think, if I remember correctly. She's going to be in these 3 counties and you know, suburban areas today to, again, in Pennsylvania, make her case so that voters show up in these suburban states, while Trump is going to North Carolina, he's going to Michigan, and he's also going to go to Pennsylvania. So very, very close, very tight race. I think it's going to go down the wire. And remember, during 2016, Trump only won Pennsylvania by a fraction of a point. And in 2020, Joe Biden only won by 1 point. So whoever gets to win Pennsylvania probably would have their neck ahead. Very close, we can't tell. And I've talked to a lot of people on the ground. It seems like right now it's really dead heat for both the candidates.
Rohit Sharma and Geeta Mohan, thank you for joining us. We'll keep tracking your updates all through this week on India Today. Election fraud versus democracy in danger. Abortion ban versus reproductive rights. A convicted felon versus a criminal prosecutor. America will choose between 2 starkly different candidates. Here's how Harris and Trump have squared off on key issues.
How do you like my garbage truck? This truck is in honor of Kamala and Joe Biden. But I just wanted to let you know that 250 million people, that's what I think the real number is for making America great again. 250 million, the real number.
They don't think in terms of garbage, okay? They don't use terms like that, and it's a shame.
Over the last 8 years, Donald Trump has become more confused, more unstable, and more angry. And it is clear he has become increasingly unhinged. But the last time, at least there were people who could control him. But notice, they're not with him this time.
Kamala's gross incompetence disqualifies her from being President of the United States of America. She is grossly incompetent. All you have to do is look at her interviews, look at what she did the other night on fake news, CNN. Just take a look. She couldn't answer a question. She's unfit for office. Everyone knows it. No one respects her. No one trusts her. No one takes her seriously. Everyone knows she is a very low IQ individual.
My economic plan actually will strengthen America's economy. They've reviewed Donald Trump's plan and have determined he will weaken America's economy, he will ignite inflation, and he will bring on a recession by the middle of next year.
The bond between the United States and Israel is strong and enduring, and if and when they say, when I'm president, I don't say that, I never say that, if and when I'm president of the United States, it will once again be stronger and closer than it ever was before. We have to win this election. If we don't win this election, there's tremendous consequence for everything. November 5th will be the most important day in the history of our country. I think it will also be the most important day in the history of Israel, if you want to know the truth. I believe that. I think you believe that, too.
As president, I will do everything in my power to end the war in Gaza. To bring home the hostages, end the suffering in Gaza, ensure Israel is secure, and ensure the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, freedom, security, and self-determination.
But I've come today with a message of hope for all Americans. With your vote, this election, most important election you've ever even thought about voting in, I will end inflation. I will stop the invasion of criminals pouring into our country, and I will bring back the American dream.
We have an opportunity in this election to turn the page on a decade of Donald Trump trying to keep us divided and afraid of each other. That is who he is, but Madison, that is not who we are.
Do you like it better now or 4 years ago? Well, I ask it a different. Do you like it better now or 4 years ago? And I've come today with a message of hope for all Americans. With your vote on Tuesday, I will end inflation. I will stop the invasion of massive numbers of criminals coming into our country. Thank you very much, Kamala and Joe. And I will bring back the American dream, and we'll bring it back stronger than ever before. But this is all you need to know. Kamala broke it, and we will fix it, and we're going to fix it fast.
Just imagine on January 20th. Because if he is elected, if Donald Trump is elected, he's going to be sitting in that Oval Office stewing over his enemies list. Because he spends full time plotting revenge and retribution. So imagine on January 20th, it's either that, him plotting over his enemies list, or me working for you on my to-do list.
It's being called the Armageddon election. On the eve of polling, both contenders Trump and Harris focused on the big prize of Pennsylvania, the largest of the 7 swing states expected to decide the American presidential elections. Opinion polls showed Donald Trump and Kamala Harris locked in a tight race. It's going down to the wire.
We just endorsed me.
It's a tight fight to the finish. In less than 48 hours, America decides its next president. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris pushed their closing messages to voters on the last day of campaigning. Republican Donald Trump made a last pitch for support in Pennsylvania, the largest of the 7 states expected to decide the presidential election. Trump repeatedly criticized the U.S. election process.
They are fighting so hard to steal this damn thing. Look at what's going on. Look at what's going on in your state. Every day, they're talking about extending hours and stuff. Who ever heard of this stuff? We should have one-day voting and paper ballots. It's a damn shame. And I'm the only one that talks about it because everyone's afraid to damn talk about it. And then they accuse you of being a conspiracy theorist. These are conspiracy, and they want to lock you up. They want to put you in jail. The ones that should be locked up are the ones that cheat on these horrible elections that we go through in our country. And I don't know what's going to happen, but for future elections, I won't be even a part of it. But you ought to damn well go to paper ballots. You ought to go to voter ID. And you ought to have the election over by 9 o'clock. I'm hearing now they're going to take weeks. Can you imagine? They spend all this money on machines, and they're going to say, we may take an extra 12 days to determine. And what do you think happens during that 12 days? What do you think happens? These elections have to be decided by 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock on Tuesday night. Bunch of crooked people. These are crooked people.
Trump, who continues to falsely claim that his 2020 loss to Democratic President Joe Biden was the result of widespread fraud, insists that he is winning.
Our country is a crooked country, okay? It's a crooked country, and we're going to make it straight. We're going to make it straight, and it's not an easy thing to do.
Opinion polls showed Donald Trump and Kamala Harris locked in a tight race, with Harris bolstered by strong support among women voters, while Trump gains ground with Hispanic voters, particularly men.